Welcome, everyone. We are so glad you are here today for our Wednesdays with the World webinar, and we're delighted that we can share in this conversation with you about navigating interfaith relations when the world is full of conflict. We know this is an important conversation because you've told us. You have emailed us and called us and shared with us that in your local communities, as the situation in the Middle East has heightened in tension, that you've experienced your own tensions there at home as you've tried to maintain your interfaith relationships while having your own prophetic sense of call around what's happening in the Middle East and while struggling yourself to sort it all out. So we hope this conversation will be helpful to you, and we are glad you are here. My name is Reverend Sherry Prestiman. I'm the Acting Associate General Minister for the United Church of Christ and co-executive for our global ministries, and it's my pleasure to moderate this webinar for you today. You've already heard me share a little bit about why we're doing this, and really we're doing this because we heard from you that it was a need and that these were dilemmas that you were navigating and trying to be faithful in the midst of. So we hope this webinar will be helpful as you attend to your own relationships and your own theological reflection and your own analysis of what's happening in the Middle East and in other places in the world as well. I want to start us today in prayer. So would you please join me in prayer? Gracious and holy God, it is Eastertide, and our eyes should be fixed still on your resurrection. And yet everywhere we look in the world, it feels like life and new life and renewal and possibility, that these things are hard to find. We see all around us such deep conflict and such horrific violence and war that destroys lives and communities and relationships. And we struggle ourselves with how to understand it and with how to have conversations about it in our own communities. We pray in this time together that something of your voice and your wisdom would be revealed. And we give thanks for each panelist here and for each person attending. Equip us with your wisdom and your guidance, O God, so that even amidst chaos and hurt, we would continue to see your new life in our midst. In Christ's name we pray it. Amen. So as we share today in this webinar, we will hear from several panelists, and you see them on your screens. I'll introduce each of them in a moment. Once they each have a moment to speak, a few minutes to talk with you about their perspective on this topic, then we will move into a time of questions. As questions arise for you at any time during the webinar, you're welcome to put those questions in the Q&A box, and we will be monitoring those, and we will come back to those during those last 15 or 20 minutes or so at the end of the webinar when we can attend to those. So keep your questions in mind. Now, let me introduce to you all of our panelists. We have three staff with us today. Reverend Mark Pettis is our Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations Minister for the United Church of Christ. Dr. Peter Macari is our Global Relations Minister for the Middle East and Europe. And Rebecca Choate is our Minister for Global Advocacy and Education. We are very fortunate to have each of them on our staff, and they bring great wisdom to this topic and many others. I also want to offer a special welcome to our panelists and guests today. First, we have Reverend Dr. Liz Nash. Liz is the moderator of the Congregational Church of Austin, Texas. We also have Reverend Dr. Jenny Schultz Thomas. Jenny is the senior minister at Countryside Community Church, United Church of Christ in Omaha, Nebraska. And lastly, we have Nina Fernando. Nina is the executive director of the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign. It is a multi-faith coalition dedicated to countering anti-Muslim discrimination in the United States. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for being with us today. Mark, let me invite you to share with us.
Thank you very much, Sherry. And I bring my greetings as well. I am going to offer just a moment of perspective on where we are working in the national setting of the United Church of Christ. The UCC is engaged in dialogue tables through the National Council of Churches primarily. And this includes a Jewish Christian dialogue table as well as a Muslim Christian dialogue table. In one of those spaces, I serve as a co-convener of the Jewish Christian dialogue table for the NCC and National Council of Synagogues. In that space, there were an extended number of years when the topic of Israel and Palestine was intentionally left off the table. It was just too hard. Yet we all continued to take action outside that space around these issues, and those actions frequently challenged our relationships. We determined after a time that it was too important to leave the topic outside the room, and we needed to find a way to discuss these issues, honoring our partnerships and leaning into our relationships. So we began that process of listening to one another and inviting all around the table to share what they were thinking and what they were feeling. From our perspective, we noted that we have both Jewish, and I speak of this from the United Church of Christ perspective, we noted in the room that we, as the UCC, have both Jewish and Palestinian partners. And we all named the deep complexity involved in these conversations and in these issues. The events of October 7th and all that have followed have certainly impacted those conversations, as you would expect, but we remain committed to our ongoing dialogue and our ongoing relationships. And that, I believe, is key as we work to understand where each other is coming from, to understand the meaning and impact of certain phrases that tend to inflame some of these relationships at times. So in these spaces, we continue to tend to our relationships alongside the important prophetic witness we represent. It's not always easy, but we recognize that it is important that we maintain these two commitments. After all, the United Church of Christ was founded as a denomination committed to the unity of all God's people. And we have lived into that aspect of our identity since our founding. Simultaneously, we are a denomination committed to speaking up for and acting in the face of injustice, seeking justice for all. And again, those two values are not always easy to hold together, but by maintaining relationships and listening in these spaces, we have continued our commitment toward both of these values. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And Peter.
Thank you, Sherry, and welcome to everybody who has joined today. It's a privilege to join in this panel, and I come to you from Washington, D.C., the United Church of Christ D.C. office. I have been participating this morning in the Churches for Middle East Peace 40th Anniversary Advocacy Summit. And during that time, I've had a chance to engage with some of our Middle Eastern partners who help inform the perspectives that we have on the realities on the ground in the Middle East. We have been especially engaged in these last 6 months since the escalation of violence in Gaza beginning on October 7th, primarily through an ecumenical witness, a collective voice of the churches, as demonstrated through numerous statements issued by Churches for Middle East Peace, which is an advocacy coalition that the United Church of Christ is a founding member of. And you can find these on the link that Becca just put in the chat. Our ecumenical voice, therefore, is one that is part of our public witness. We are also involved in advocacy and education on the issue. And certainly, it's important to say that our engagement on this issue has not been limited to these past 6 months. In fact, the United Church of Christ and its predecessors have a long mission history in the region. The first congregational missionaries went to the Middle East in 1819, so over 200 years of mission engagement in the region. And while our understanding of mission has changed, that engagement continues to this day. We engage with a number of partners in the region, including church partners like the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land. The Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem operates a hospital in Gaza that we have supported through our mission partnership with the Episcopal Diocese over these years. And associated with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land is Dar el-Kalima University, which is a fully accredited university that has its main campus in Bethlehem and a branch campus in Gaza. And we've learned just in the last week or so that the branch campus in Gaza has been destroyed. And I was in conversation with the Reverend Dr. Mitri Raheb, who is the founder of Dar el-Kalima University, this morning here in Washington, and he shared some of the impact of that reality with us, but also the dedication of Dar el-Kalima staff who themselves in Gaza are displaced, but who continue to provide psychosocial care for young children who are also displaced with their families. It's really a moving expression of continued witness in the midst of ongoing crisis. We also relate to the YMCA and YWCA of Palestine, ecumenical organizations like the Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center and Kairos Palestine, and the Middle East Council of Churches and its Department for Service to Palestinian Refugees, which dates back to the late 1940s and has been operational in Gaza. Itself has had its facilities damaged and staff displaced as a result of the last 6 months of conflict there. So today we are challenged by how to appropriately respond to the cries of our partners and the witness that they offer and want us to carry with us here, as we also engage with interreligious partners whose perspectives and engagement may differ. So we're grateful for this opportunity to talk about how do we lift up those commitments to justice and peace and interfaith relations. Our Palestinian partners remind us that history did not begin on October 6th. And in fact, the United Church of Christ has been engaged through policy resolutions at General Synod dating back to 1967, just a few weeks after the 1967 war in the Middle East. So we have deep connections, we have deep commitments, and we're deeply engaged. And it's a privilege for me to represent us in nurturing those relationships in the Middle East and particularly in Israel-Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter and Mark. You help remind us that the United Church of Christ has long-standing attention to interfaith relationships, both domestically as well as globally. And also that we have these historic partnerships with folks in the Middle East, and that those relationships and those conversations inform our work always. Now I want to invite Liz, you to speak. A few weeks ago, your pastor emailed me and told me about an incident that happened in your community and how it was really challenging you as a congregation to know how to respond, particularly in regards to interfaith relationships. So Liz, tell us about that.
Thank you. On February 4th, 3 Palestinian American men, among many others, attended a rally for Gaza at the state capitol in Austin. Afterward, they drove to get something to eat with another friend in a pickup truck to the West Campus area near the University of Texas before heading home to Dallas. There was a keffiyeh scarf tied to the truck, expressing in the context of the war on Gaza their stand as Palestinians with the people under attack. As they stopped at a stop sign, a man on a bicycle approached, and the men heard the tailgate open. The man quickly opened the passenger side door, put his bike in front of the truck, and pulled Zechariah Dorr out and attacked him. The attacker, Bert James Baker, began punching Dorr and yelling profanities, including racial slurs. The other men jumped out of the car and they all fought back against Baker. Then Baker pulled out a large knife and stabbed Dorr in the chest. After he was stabbed, according to the police report, Dorr knocked the knife out of Baker's hand before Baker was subdued and arrested. Zechariah Dorr was badly hurt with broken ribs, but thank God survived and is recuperating in Dallas, where he lives with his wife and young child. Dorr's father, Nizar Dorr, who had attended the rally, was on his way home to Dallas when his son Zechariah was stabbed. Of course, he feared for his son's life when the call about the stabbing came. The family came down to Austin and spoke at a news conference later, expressing grief that they could not protect their son and anger at the Biden administration for not supporting a ceasefire. Some in the community expressed anger that it took a couple of days to escalate the assault charge on Baker to a hate crime. A city council member spoke at the press conference, as did other members of the Muslim community and a representative from Jewish Voices for Peace. The stabbing and the news conference were covered by the news media here that week, although it took a day or two to be covered nationally. The stabbing happened 4 blocks from our church and was witnessed by a number of students in the nearby apartments, since it happened about 7 p.m., a time when lots of people are out. We are a very small church, but we had a student visitor the next Sunday who lived right there and whose roommate saw some of it. But after the commitment to filing hate crime charges happened, it seemed to us that things went quiet. Jenny Brown Daniel, our pastor, wrote, and I edited a letter to the local paper, the Austin American-Statesman, responding as the pastor and moderator of our church. It did not get published. Why? We don't know. Our local paper is greatly diminished after being acquired several times by media conglomerates. Letters to the editor are published only 2 or 3 days a week, so for whatever reason, ours did not make the meager list. I did not see any that responded to this terrible act. There's another free local paper that did run a couple of columns on it, but that seems to be about it locally. There was an interview with Zechariah Dorr in Dallas after he returned home, and some coverage in the Texas Observer, the state watchdog beacon of journalism, but little else that I have been able to find. Several of us have wondered what has happened with the prosecution of this crime. Jenny did reach out to Sherry Presteman to ask for any interfaith resources that would help address what happened, and we are grateful to be included in this session to talk together with our UCC community. We tried to contact others here in the religious community who would be responding. Jenny reached out to other progressive clergy who didn't know of any prayer vigils or public response. She sent an email to the imam at the mosque close to our church, a mosque we've had a cordial relationship in the past, without a response until we received an invitation a day or two before an open house last week. I searched the website of the local interfaith organization, found nothing. They eventually apologized publicly on their website for the slow response. I have since found that there was a gathering sponsored by the Council of American Islamic Relations at a local progressive church, but we didn't hear about it at the time, even though we were seeking to know. Until the recent past, Whit Bodman was a member of our church, and he had extensive ties in the Muslim community, but he has since moved, so he would have perhaps been on that network, but was not here. It was odd that we do connect with many progressive churches locally, and really no one seemed to know how to respond to this act. Further, although we live in a well-known progressive city, the response by the city leadership to this public act of hate, along with the response of the University of Texas to this act so near the campus, has been lacking. The mayor made a public statement condemning it, but did not call for a widespread public response. The university issued a statement addressing student safety, but really said nothing about what actually happened. As in other places, the mix of public and political arguments about Gaza and Israel is substantial here. I say all this about the lack of connection and coverage because we have encountered what feels like a bewildering atmosphere in the face of what happened. a weak response to this act of violence. I'm not sure why that is, whether many of us are overwhelmed, which we are, with the cruel political situation in Texas, whether we have been immobilized by the horror of the attack by Hamas and the growing horror of the Israeli response, whether we need more from our political leadership, or whether we are just not responding out of a what can we do feeling. I think it may be all of the above. At our church, we have prayed about the situation in Gaza many Sundays, and we responded with prayer after the stabbing. The church was supportive of the letter Jenny tried to have published in the paper. As the local Dialogue Institute, led by the Turkish community, shared an iftar with us last week, Jenny expressed our concern for the Muslim community because of the stabbing, which they appreciated. We have otherwise not done much. To be honest, we have been pretty immobilized. Our church is in the middle of a major building redevelopment process that is challenging and absorbing. We have great pastoral leadership, but our numbers are low. We understood ourselves in the past to be a church with a focus on social justice and the least among us, but we are turned inward right now with reason, and that feeds, I know, the lack of direction in our own response. We need partners, and we've not been able to find them. So now the question that we as a church need to confront is this: how long can we continue to be so quiet? Are we like the church at Laodicea in Revelation, condemned for being neither hot nor cold? Or are we just doing the best we can to be a community that will one day be able to do more? It's somewhere in between, I believe. Although we have missed opportunities, I do think we are at a point as a church where we need to face the terrible situation in Gaza. One last personal observation. I have felt caught between the different viewpoints in my circle of friends and family. Jewish friends, Muslims I'm close to, those in the Jewish community in my neighborhood who support Israel, those who work in the wider community on other justice issues that seem to be walking carefully on the Gaza war. The underlying issues do not give a right behavior award to any side. The wrong mainly lives with the innocent people who have been killed and continue to suffer. And I, like so many of us, worry about the implications of this war on the coming elections in this country. It is a bewildering time. I hope for me that my faith in God will bring some clarity, and I pray for the will to keep seeking how to respond. I hope too that together today we can work together to find our calling, to help in some way to restore human dignity, to alleviate the suffering, and to work for peace. Thanks for this opportunity to speak.
Liz, thank you so much. I mean, the incident that occurred there in Austin is unfortunately not unlike incidents occurring across the country, anti-Muslim and also anti-Jewish. And your description of how your church attempted to and wanted to respond is also compelling, as is your naming of the perplexity that you experienced as you were unable to find the partners and the voice, larger voice in that community that you hoped for. I know your church well, and I know you are authentically a church that is focused on justice and peace. So thank you.
Thank you.
Jenny, your context is especially unique and must offer a particular point of view in this moment. Tell us about it.
Thank you, Sherry. The Reverend Jenny Schultz Thomas. I am the senior minister at Countryside Community Church in Omaha, Nebraska, and we are the Christian partner in the Tri-Faith Initiative. So context, you probably know or have heard at least of Tri-Faith. It began with a rabbi talking to a great friend about parking, and then in 2006, that need for parking developed a strong connection of kinship and relationship and friendship. Rabbi Arya Azriel, with a good friend, Shakil, who was part of the Muslim community at the time, started meeting in a basement, actually, and then meeting in each other's homes, kind of secretly, under the radar. And Rabbi Azriel talks about gosh, I need to show up at this man's home who's invited me over. And he told his wife, and she said, well, you're not going alone. And she baked him a honey cake. And so this all began with friendship and a honey cake at the invitation of relationship building. So I come at this from a different perspective, just as a local pastor serving in a congregation, have worked across the country in different communities geographically at the intersection of justice, faith, and politics, where I first met Nina in Raleigh, North Carolina, with refugee communities, fighting ICE, looking at different ways that we work together across ecumenical and interfaith lines. But the Tri-Faith Initiative is a unique perspective and a unique community. The mission is to foster co-location, or does co-location foster community? Inspired by Jewish, Muslim, and Christian communities of faith, can we build an environment of inclusion and then develop relationships that can sustain the kinds of winds and turmoil that we are facing now? I was called to this position before October I was living in North Carolina, serving as a pastor and an executive director in an arts community. And then October 7th happened. And then I arrived a month later, 6th and 7th on our campus. And I think this question that many of us working in either nonprofit world or in the local church has is, how do we begin to foster and model relationships that are already rooted in the context of a tri-faith situation, right? If you think about inner city work or even a small town, oftentimes there will be different communities of faith, whether it's a mosque or a synagogue or a Christian Presbyterian church. We all have similar experiences, and we can shape the relationships that exist on this campus in a similar way. So we are asking this question all the time about co-location, because that's kind of the heartbeat of a tri-faith. Does co-location foster relationships? And I think we come at that question differently now than maybe we did before the events of October. Sometimes co-location can foster community. Sometimes co-location can also create an environment whereby by default, you are faced to speak to and articulate the complexities of the relationships therein. So if you have not already been working in your community to foster relationships and then just create a co-location experiment, that doesn't necessitate, ooh, wow, honey cakes all around. And so I think what we have learned post those trying days in October is that relationships are the core and the heartbeat. And when God calls us together, no matter what position that we come from, building relationship across difference and understanding that we are called beyond the scope of our difference is going to be the unifying opportunity that allows us to face those resistances and move forward still intact in relationship. So we've had, in November, we had a silent visual on the campus, no political signs, because politics and justice are also always at the core of mobilizing communities across difference, especially in ours, where AMI, the American Muslim Institute, I was just celebrating this morning, Eid al-Fitr this morning with hundreds of people right before I walked over on the lawn, 30 different languages. You know, you can just look at the Lebanese, the Turks, like everyone has their traditional garb and the food is amazing and people are just beaming, right? Because there's relationships there, but on the campus, there are people from the Jewish temple, from Countryside, UCC congregation, and we are all invited. And we know that these are the moments. So co-location helps because you're not all showing up otherwise, or even feeling that the invitation is extended, right? Because we're afraid of difference and afraid of taking those steps. But co-location has allowed for baby steps, right? Go to Friday prayers, come to sunrise service at Countryside. And we've built enough of an opportunity to develop closeness of relationship and trust before tragedy and turmoil and war and otherness kind of creeps in. And I think that happens. Like what we've seen on the campus is that within the Jewish temple, so Temple Israel is one of the only reformed synagogues in the state of Nebraska, serving over 650 families. So they moved first and built their property in 2013 because they needed more land, and they were moving anyways. So if you're part of, Temple Israel and want to be a part of a Reform synagogue, you're moving out here to Faith Plaza. Then you have a few years later, AMI is breaking ground, and then Countryside finally. And so moving here, people were motivated to move here for some similar reasons and then other practical purposes. But what we found is that when people find themselves on the campus, there's a bridge called Abraham's Bridge that is between all three of our physical buildings. And then there's a fourth building that's the Tri-Faith Center. And we walk Abraham's Bridge. You can see the garden where everyone is toiling soil together and sweating to death together and planting and growing. And that's everyday living. And then you're walking over to have a coffee. Then you're walking over to prayers. That we walk this circle, it's the refining fire of relationship building that, in spite of the differences, because we all have our own inner sort of turmoil. I mean, to be a part of Temple Israel, it's just a microcosm, right? You've seen the country. Just because you're a part of a Jewish synagogue doesn't mean you're all just like, woo, we all agree on all the things. It's so much more complex than that. You're a part of AMI, 30 different languages, so many different ethnic backgrounds and traditions. So we've seen, after a silent vigil, then we had a group from the Spirit of Galilee, from the Galilee, who came in February. And we're doing the similar kind of work that Tri-Faith does, holding up different voices. Greek Orthodox priest who was Palestinian, Israeli, a Muslim woman, Palestinian Muslim woman. And they spoke together about the work that we're kind of doing, but they're doing it in their home in the Spirit of Galilee, in the Galilee. And then there was sort of conflict and uprising on our own campus within each of the congregations because of language around, why would you bring this person, or don't allow this person to speak? And then they're like, no, you have to let this person speak, right? So we had a lot of struggles because every time you take one step forward, right, you have to face the complexities that lie within the political socio understanding that is perpetuated from the external community. So then we had, some of our leaders in the AMI had to have police escorts, and so the struggle is very real. But at the core, every time we come back to a 10 p.m. coffee conversation, it's relationships. Why are we here, and how do we continue to speak love and peace into the midst of those relationships? And so, does co-location foster community? I think definitely, and it invites us to deepen those relationships, that community might grow, and that the world might see that this is not a great experiment. This is what God intends for all of God's people. Thank you.
Jenny, thank you. That is so fascinating to hear about the experience of your tri-location space, and how relationships both help approach the difficult conversations, but also don't leave you immune to the difficult conversations. Thank you so much for sharing that. Nina, your organization is at the forefront and in the center of speaking to the kinds of incidents that are happening, and this anti-Muslim discrimination across the country. And you are equipping people for how to combat that. Can you share a little bit more?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's so good to be with you. I think I want to start by saying, I come from a Catholic upbringing myself, though I've spent, my work addressing interreligious engagement at the intersection of social justice. And I feel like I'm UCC by association because my husband is ordained in the UCC, and I've always so admired the UCC commitment to social justice and inclusion. So I'm really grateful for this conversation, and special thanks to Peter and to Mark for welcoming me and inviting me, and to all that have shared so far. I have some slides, so I'm going to share my screen and hopefully it will work. Can you see that? Okay, let's move this here. So the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign, Standing with American Muslims Advancing American Ideals, is a multi-faith coalition addressing anti-Muslim discrimination in the United States. We were founded in 2010 at a time when there was a spike in anti-Muslim rhetoric in the public sphere. If you remember the controversy around the so-called Ground Zero Mosque and the pastor in Florida threatening to burn the Quran. And the Islamic Society of North America at the time had really strong interfaith relationships and at the national level, and convened an emergency interfaith summit that was widely publicized at the time that served as our founding of the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign. And I think I really want to uplift here that this happened because of the relationships that were built over time, not in a crisis moment, but long before. And so the importance of doing this work continually in good times and in bad is something I want to uplift. More broadly, we envision a pluralistic and inclusive United States of America where all people are treated with fairness and dignity and respect. And we do this by connecting and equipping and mobilizing faith communities to be strategic partners in addressing anti-Muslim discrimination in the U.S. What makes us unique among an ecosystem of organizations, particularly Muslim-led, Muslim-serving, and Muslim-adjacent organizations, is that we are working with faith communities beyond the Muslim community primarily to see this as their issue too, because if we're going to see change, we need all of us to play a role in that. And so our national members are religious denominations and faith organizations who are doing this work in different ways. And we are proud that the United Church of Christ is a founding member of Shoulder to Shoulder. We have local congregations and organizations, particularly interfaith organizations around the country doing this work in different ways. Tri-Faith is a member, and we're really grateful for that. And we, who we are, we think of ourselves as our partners, our members, but also, anyone who is working shoulder to shoulder in addressing anti-Muslim discrimination. We believe, our orientation is that we believe people of faith are powerful agents of change. And so if you want to share in the chat why you think people of faith are powerful agents of change, I welcome you to do that. And just for me to say that I personally believe people of faith are powerful agents of change because we have hope in the possibility of what this world could be in the midst of so many challenges. We situate ourselves in larger stories, whether that be from our sacred text or the stories of our ancestors, and also thinking of our stories continuing on in future generations. And so I find that personally compelling as it relates to addressing our social issues of concern, in this time. And so for Shoulder to Shoulder, we are hoping to tell a larger story of people coming together, across difference. Just to share a few personal inspirations and orientations is, the value and of human dignity for all people, no exceptions. As I shared before, situating ourselves in a greater story that includes our ancestors and future generations. A note around looking for the helpers, as Mr. Rogers advises, but also being a helper ourselves. This quote, really grounds me. We should seek not so much to pray, but to become prayer. So what does it mean to be intentional about our action, pairing words with action and deed? Songs and sacred text, there is a season. I think that is one note to say that there are times to be loud and public facing and times to do work that's behind the scenes. And we already heard some of that just now and from the sharing. Also, what does the Lord require of us to seek justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly with our God? So those are some among many ways in which people we know orient themselves in the work. What we think it's important to emphasize in this time, but really always, is affirming our shared values, affirming our relationships across difference, recognizing and uplifting constantly that no community is a monolith. The American Muslim community is not a monolith. The Jewish community, the Christian, we all know well, the Christian community is not a monolith. And so when we see messages or are in conversation where that theme is being emerged, all Jews believe XYZ, all Muslims believe XYZ. It's our role to counter that, to step in and to offer a more perspective and point to stories that we know of. Another piece is to hold space for each other's pain and identify our emotions and attend to them. This moment is emotionally charged. It is stirring generational trauma in folks. And that's the reality of the challenges that we're in, whether we're feeling it ourselves or the folks that we're talking to and trying to build relationships with. So really recognizing that sometimes, many of us want to move to the solution and move to the action, but sometimes in that conversation, we just need a whole space for each other's pain. We just need to cry together. We just need to listen, even if we're not aligned or on the same page or even in the same book. Another thing to uplift is we are saturated in negativity and negative stories, and we need to really point to the positive stories, and be a part of those positive stories ourselves. But there are so many out there, and I hope to raise just a few in this sharing now. But also, I know there are many of you joining who have those positive stories and are a part of those positive stories, and really just lifting that up in all the many ways, whether that be in conversation, on the pulpit, in op-eds, on our social media, whatever that be. We need to hear it, and we need to be uplifted in this time. And then, orienting ourselves towards a vision of pluralism and pluralism as this active engagement, this tension, and this the possibilities that unfolds when we are engaging in diversity and difference and not being on the same page always. So just to come back to shoulder and the way that we think of our work, we have 3 pillars. We connect, we equip, and we mobilize. We believe if we're going to make change on addressing a very complicated issue, anti-Muslim discrimination in the United States, we need to have a multi-pronged approach. And that applies to any form of hate, anti-Jewish hate, anti-Asian, anti-Black racism, you name it. We need to have a multi-faith or a multi-pronged approach and a whole of society approach to addressing that. So now I just want to share some examples through and beyond the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign. And again, as a hope to tell a larger story of the ways people are doing this, and just thinking of it through the pillars, the connect, equip, mobilize lens. I love clip art. I think this is very funny, but really our team has kind of oriented ourselves towards connecting and affirming and prioritizing the relationships we have. So many email exchanges among folks that are connected to us and folks that are seeking connections and help and resources and want a thought partner. One-to-one conversations, just getting on the phone and having check-ins with folks, Zooms and what have you, just to prioritize the relationships that we have. And we have been following many organizations and congregations who are doing good work, and we're seeing different things. You've already heard about Silent Vigil, and actually Tri-Faith Silent Vigil. When we've shared it with our community network, there were others around the country who drew from that, who were really grateful for that example and brought that to their community. Forums, listening sessions, book and film clubs, dialogues, off-the-record talks, concerts, shared meals, just all kinds of different ways people are coming together and navigating all that is this moment, confronting hard and multiple truths. There are many stories, and what we see depends on where we're standing, inviting each other in with humility, recognizing that we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. We're learning and growing. We're all on a journey. Again, prioritizing relationships, coordinating efforts around shared issues of concern. We're in a very important presidential election year. There's so many different ways in which people are coming together. Shoulder to shoulder every year through our Ramadan campaign, we uplift iftars open to interfaith guests around the country, and we're able to identify this year around 140 iftars in 36 states, and grateful for all of you who I'm sure have participated in this in different ways, and really it's about uplifting how Ramadan's a great opportunity to get to know your Muslim neighbors. And in 2019 we went around and visited 5 iftars in the American Southeast, showing the diversity of the ways in which communities are coming together and the diversity of the American Muslim community. We made a mini doc with discussion guides. So, all of that's up on our website if that's of interest. And as was mentioned, today is Eid. So wish your Muslim neighbors Eid Mubarak, happy Eid today and in this season. We've partnered with different organizations. This is one effort with Interfaith America, where we're trying to uplift stories from these interfaith iftars, and even an op-ed that was written by my colleague and my colleagues, and wanting to tell good stories, again, uplifting positive stories of the ways people are coming together. These are some examples of folks around the country. A group locally in Washington State, they're doing potlucks for democracy and like really exploring the metaphor of a potluck. And what that means. Another a piece what they have is a podcast, and this one is Can Faith Unite and Not Divide? And as it relates, in many ways to this conversation right now. Just some headlines of different articles. Houston interfaith leaders are talking quietly. So as I mentioned, sometimes the work is more private, and that's okay and important and essential. Muslim-Jewish relationships to the test, but there are religious leaders who are determined to protect them, and facilitating hard conversations and relationships in this time. So going back to our Connect, Equip, Mobilize. So equipping with Shoulder to Shoulder, we offer trainings and workshops and toolkits and messaging guides. And this little pointing finger is to represent, if we don't have those resources, we hope to point you to other organizations who do, other programs, other toolkits that are out there, and really rely on our partners to let us know if it's not on our radar. Every month, our team puts together and publishes a monthly resource roundup, and it's basically funding opportunities, workshops, relevant resources that we're seeing and collecting, and we publish that on our Medium account. Our Faith Over Fear training is a training that explores first what compels us to do this work. So if I'm not Muslim, what does it mean for me to address anti-Muslim discrimination? What is Islamophobia and anti-Muslim discrimination in the United States? How does it show up in society? That it's not just interpersonal, it's also institutional and structural. How it impacts, it's individualized and impacts, mental, spiritual, emotional well-being. How we kind of go through what is Islamophobia. We also talk about who American Muslims are and all their diversity, and outside of an Islamophobia lens. We then kind of dive in, and the real heart of the training is messaging and strategies. So how do I talk about it in a way that doesn't reinforce negative stereotypes and myths and misperceptions about Islam and Muslims when I'm trying to negate, how do I uplift in a way that's invitational? And then what can I do about it? And that's a lot of what this conversation is about today. We've done this training around the country and virtually, just in the recent months. There was a training in Bozeman, Montana, actually on October 5th. Just days before the context changed radically. And we had some virtual workshops in between. We hosted one at Jewish Theological Seminary in January of this year. We just a few weeks ago were in Houston, Texas, hosting a Faith Over Fear. But we've also done so many workshops and on Zoom and in person for school districts and youth groups and congregations. And you can take this training at any time on religionandpubliclife.org, and that's also linked on our website. This is just a few examples of some past programming. I'm not Muslim. Why should I care about anti-Muslim discrimination? Dinner dialogues and, sorry, I think I heard someone. No. Okay. And Christian nationalism and how it connects to anti-Muslim discrimination. In November of last year, we had been planning this conversation for months, an all-Jewish panel on addressing Islamophobia and anti-Semitism together. And you can imagine after October 7th, this conversation held even a heavier weight and took on a heavier tenor, but it was really important. And we're really grateful for our partners who wanted to have the conversation, even through the challenges. And that's recorded and available if you're interested. Earlier this year, we hosted a workshop, a training on allyship and accountability. So featured these two leaders who first offered what is allyship, what are the pitfalls of allyship, and really unpacking in a real, I think, helpful and systematic way. And then accountability when we have caused harm. We're human beings, we're going to make mistakes. How do we repair? How do we approach accountability? Not just interpersonally, but also in our communities.
Nina,
Yes.
I am going to have to, I hate to stop you, but
Okay.
I have to because we need to leave space for our questions from
Okay.
our attendees. So I'm so sorry
Okay,
because
no problem.
what you're providing is amazing and really good resources. I wonder if we will be able to share your PowerPoint with others who have attended this or signed up. Would that be okay? Okay, super. Super. And I'm so mindful that although your mission is to dismantle Islamophobia and discrimination against Muslims, so many of the values and the guidelines that you're painting for us are applicable across interfaith relationships. So I think this is just excellent resourcing. Thank you. So let's open it up now to questions from our participants. And Becca's going to read those out for us from the Q&A.
Yes, we actually have had two questions related to anti-Semitism and accusations of being anti-Semitic when we're speaking about the current situation and the conflation between critique of the government of Israel and critique of and anti-Semitism itself. So I wonder if maybe Peter, you might start addressing that, and I don't know if Jenny will have any insights at all, or any of our other panelists are free to speak about the conflation between anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, how we might, as people of faith, think about the ways in which we use our words carefully, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I appreciate that it has been raised. First of all, I just want to affirm that the United Church of Christ over the years has been deeply engaged in Jewish-Christian dialogue. We have a strong commitment to it and have asserted that through General Synod resolutions. We have also been very clear in our rejection of anti-Semitism and any kind of bias that discriminates against a group of people. In our engagement globally and domestically, we have been critical of government policies, whether that is U.S. government policies, policies of various governments around the world in their engagement with populations. And certainly in Israel-Palestine, we have a body of policy that is critical of Israeli policy. In our 2021 resolution at General Synod, there is a particular part of the resolution that says we reject the idea that any criticism of policies of the State of Israel is inherently anti-Semitic, in confession that some criticism is anti-Semitic in intent or impact. So criticism of a nation's policies and practices does not automatically equate with an expression of hatred or bias, bigotry against a particular group of people. And we need to be very clear in separating those two. So that that we are consistent in our approach. Our criticism of Israeli policies is just that: criticism of a country's of a national policy and practice, and not reflective of a bias against the Jewish people. We hold those relationships dear, and we are very engaged in responding to incidents of anti-Semitism when we see them. So we just need to be very clear to make that distinction in how we engage.
Anyone else care to speak around how you're navigating maybe anti-Semitism and those kinds of conversations with folks? Because it is, I mean, as Peter said, we do have to, there are some words that can inflame conversations, whether or not we mean them to.
Yeah, I can speak to a response. I think that's more helpful than maybe the language is the language, and people have and come with their own understanding of what those words mean and how heavy and weighted they are on the campus, rather than, because politics is always equally a part of what inherently we hold. Maybe not inherently, but it has become so much so that we bring to each conversation. So instead of having naming specifically, we have a hard time on the campus because a lot of the things that we do, and we're looked to by other organizations across the globe really for how we respond to things as this great experiment of co-location. And so with that becomes this need to respond with a statement. And as we know, statements are just our friends. They love us. Statements eat us up, and they tell a unilateral story that really doesn't exist. And so we have had statements, we're moving, this is an amazing opportunity. And then following these events, there's also pressure that individuals bring and each community brings, because a statement holds a lot of weight. And so one of our communities necessarily would have been helped significantly if the three partners could have written and put out a statement that they could hold up to the world. Hello, we are on this campus for this reason, and this campus supports our humanity first and our dignity, and then ceasefire and all the things. So no statement really was, we weren't able to come up with a statement that each community could sign on to that had more than 5 words, right? And so, which is an important step for us, and understanding that it's not always, words are important and words harm, but we came to this conclusion over lots of conversations and dialogue that our relationships and how we foster them and how we show up for each other right now, that is the statement that we are putting out to the world, that we are walking the bridge, that we are sitting together and having difficult conversations. And so this whole anti-Semitic versus, anti-Zionist, these things are a part of our everyday rhetoric, and from different communities. We'll have people from the Christian side asking really great questions, but asking those questions on a campus where the stakes are very high, and then not maybe having this deep understanding and the weight that those words, what they hold. So we at Countryside, the Christian partner, did a series of podcast listening sessions where we put out, Ezra Klein, right? And then Rabbi Sharon, we put out multiple podcasts and said, listen to these, and we're going to do our own work. And we're going to come and have conversations together so that we could educate and understand the weight of those words, and then be able to respond as a community without walking over to our Jewish friends and saying, oh, I think I'm saying some safe, lovely words, but I'm actually doing harm because I'm asking you to teach me, just like we do in white Anglo America around race. Please teach me what I don't understand. So that's one practical way that you can do the work on your own terms in safe spaces, and then at the same time have food and coffee and ask questions to your trusted friends who you're in relationship with, or at least take the first step. So one example that might be helpful for people.
And it strikes me that because things are so polarized just in general in this country right now, there is a real hesitation amongst many of us of approaching any kind of difficult conversation where there might be disagreement or different perspective. And yet this moment, and particularly this crisis and all that we're talking about here today, really requires us to hold space for brave conversation. That we have to be willing to create those spaces, to hold them in place, and to sit with the discomfort sometimes. Because that is the only way that we can move through this and gain the wisdom that we need, and the compassion as well. So I think creating those kinds of brave spaces is one task, and there's lots of ways that can be done.
We've had way too many questions, Sherry. I'm afraid we're not going to be able to answer them since it's now our time is up. But I wanted to note that there were a couple more questions around where to look for some resources from our global partners. So I want to direct folks to the Global Ministries website. We're going to send a whole bunch of links and some of these follow-up details in an email afterwards. So you don't need to worry about saving the chat or trying to figure all of that out. And if folks are watching later on YouTube, all of those links will be in the description section of our YouTube video. So I just wanted to make that clear. So if folks are looking for information on the current situation from our partners' perspective in Israel-Palestine, go to Global Ministries website for that. And we, Shoulder to Shoulder, as Nina was talking about, has a lot of great resources, as you know, as you can hear. So we'll make sure to link you all and connect you with some of the work that they're doing as well. This has been a really engaging webinar, so I want to thank you all for putting all of those questions in the Q&A, and I'm sorry that we haven't been able to get to them.
And Mark, you're going to offer closing comments.
Thank you very much. I want to echo, thank you for being part of this very important conversation. You know, I hope the conversation's been helpful. I'm not sure that we offered many concrete or perfect answers. I don't know that there actually are any perfect answers these days. But I believe what we heard today is the need to stay committed to the relationships and stay engaged in the conversation, to hold fast to our values, to share honestly, and to listen graciously. We're living in a time right now when we are just encouraged to be divided, to push away others to other people, and you know, this is not how we can engage in these relationships, because we know that the relationships themselves are the core of how we engage when we understand the why behind where people are coming from. Why do people hold the perspectives they hold? And we won't find that out unless we are willing to engage in those conversations. And so I just want to encourage us to keep doing just that, to lean into our relationships and to really seek to understand where people are coming from, and to be willing to share and to listen. And if you would, I would invite us to close in an attitude of prayer. Gracious God, thank you for this time. Thank you for the commitment of those who were present, who presented, who listened, who shared, who asked questions. Thank you for the commitment to finding ways to remain in relationship with those of other faiths, with those of other perspectives, at a time in our world and our country where that is just not what we are hearing. We ask you to draw near to each of us, to draw near to this world, and to help bring us closer to one another, not further apart. We ask you to enliven our minds and our hearts as we continue to engage around such important issues that hold the future of our world in the midst. We pray all of this in your most holy name, O God. Amen.